Is there any product of theirs which is edible or drinkable?
Pardon, I didn't know.
Is there some other product besides the animal itself, such as milk from a cow or goat from a cheese?
Goat from a cheese?
Dorothy Kilgallen used to feel like she was everywhere at once, a sharp newspaper columnist, a radio voice, and one of the familiar faces on What's My Line. In the early television era, that mix of celebrity and serious reporting was rare, and she made it look easy. But after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963, Kilgallen pivoted from entertainment chatter to something darker. She questioned the official story, chased sources across cities, and dug hard into the people around Jack Ruby, the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald on live TV. Then, on November 8, 1965, she was found dead in her New York townhouse, and the story shifted from investigation to mystery. Today, we're dusting off our files and looking at how a What's My Line star wound up at the center of one of the strangest JFK-era side stories, and why her death still raises questions tied to that confession-fueled pursuit. A reporter built for big stories.
Dorothy Kilgallen, yes, she was on What's My Line. She was the smart one on the end down there who guessed the occupations of people more than anybody else, right? But also she was syndicated in 200 newspapers across the country, the Hearst chain, Voice of Broadway, articles, everything.
Dorothy Kilgallen was born in 1913 and grew up with newspapers in the house. Her father worked as a reporter in the Hearst organization, and she learned early that curiosity is a job skill, not just a personality trait. In the 1930s, she covered major events, including the 1935 Bruno Hauptmann trial tied to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, and she earned a reputation for being fast, fearless, and detail-minded. She did not just rewrite what others said, she noticed what others missed. Her public fame took off in 1936 when she joined a race around the world against two other reporters. She was the only woman in the three-person contest, and she turned that experience into her book, Girl Around the World, which helped lock in her image as a modern roaming newswoman. By the 1950s, she was both a working journalist and a recognizable TV personality. On What's My Line, she came across as witty and tough, which meant that when she later questioned the Kennedy story, she was doing it with a built-in audience. When JFK became her obsession.
Now, when JFK died, she became obsessed with that case. Now, why did that happen? Well, first of all, she was a very good friend of JFK's. He had been to her home and played charades.
After the assassination, Kilgallen argued that the public deserved the full record, not a cleaned-up summary. 1 week after the killing, she wrote that it was a dark chapter in American history and that the public had a right to read every word of the official record. She also became openly skeptical of the Warren Commission's lone gunman conclusion, calling the idea that Oswald killed Kennedy by himself laughable. That tells you she was not dabbling in doubt, she was planting a flag. Instead of treating Jack Ruby as a random avenger, she treated him as the key that might open the whole case. Ruby's act happened in the Dallas police basement with cameras rolling, and to Kilgallen, that alone demanded harder questions about access, timing, and motive. Over the next 18 months, she worked the story the way she worked everything else, by building contacts and chasing leads beyond New York. Reports later described her traveling to places like Dallas and New Orleans as she tried to connect names, movements, and money. The Jack Ruby breakthrough.
Jack Ruby, who allegedly killed Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24, 1963, was only interviewed by one reporter throughout the trial, Dorothy Kilgallen. Since her interview with Ruby, many noted that Kilgallen carried a file with her at all times. It remained under lock and key when not physically in her hands, according to those close to her. Kilgallen's file continued to grow throughout the investigation. In a conversation with her lawyer, Jim Garrison, that's the guy who prosecuted, that was in the movie, Kevin Costner played him in the JFK movie.
Yeah.
Prior to a trip to New Orleans, with Dorothy later inexplicably canceled, he remembers her saying, "I'm going to break the real story and have the biggest scoop of the century."
At Ruby's 1964 trial, Kilgallen managed something that hundreds of reporters could not. She got an interview with Ruby. Accounts say she persisted even after being told no, and she found a way to reach him through the defense team. Her published descriptions made Ruby sound shaken rather than swaggering, with a nervous energy that never quite settled. She portrayed him as frightened, and she hinted that he was wrestling with pressures he could not fully explain. What unsettled her was how much of the bigger picture never made it into the courtroom. After Ruby was sentenced, she warned readers that the public still had not heard everything that mattered. In a March 20th, 1965 column, she wrote that the point to remember was that the whole truth had not been told. She believed evidence existed that never got aired, whether because it was blocked, avoided, or simply not pursued hard enough. The day she was found dead.
Tonight I'm sitting in Dorothy's seat, but no one could ever possibly take her place. Good night, Bennett.
Well, a lot of people knew Dorothy as a very tough game player. Others knew her as a tough newspaper woman. When she went in for a story, nothing could get in her way. But we got to know her as a human being, and a more lovable, softer, loyal person never lived. And we're going to miss her terribly.
On November 8th, 1965, Kilgallen was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse. Descriptions of the scene were immediately odd. She was in bed, wearing a blue bathrobe, false eyelashes, and a floral hair accessory. A week later, the New York Times reported an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates, and said police found no indication of violence or suicide. The assistant medical examiner described the circumstances as undetermined and emphasized they did not truly know what had happened. That ambiguity is part of what keeps the story alive. Even in the moment, officials were not presenting a clear narrative of intention, accident, or self-harm, just a toxicology result paired with uncertainty. Later writers emphasized additional details they believed did not fit a simple accidental overdose. Those details include claims that she was found in a bedroom she did not normally use and questions about what was and what was not near her in the room. The file that disappeared.
On November 8, 1965, a 52-year-old woman was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse. Between the time her body was discovered and about 6 hours later, FBI agents swarmed that townhouse and took all of her documents, all of her files, everything they could find.
After her death, the most important missing item was not jewelry or cash. It was paper. Multiple accounts say she kept a thick packet of JFK-related notes and research, and that it vanished after she died. Author Mark Shaw later argued that her toxicology suggests drugs in her system beyond what she was prescribed, and he pointed to reports of powder residue in a glass near the bed as something that looked staged rather than routine. Shaw also said he believed someone removed her files to erase what she had assembled. Shaw's broader theory is that Kilgallen was circling organized crime angles, including the name Carlos Marcello. A U.S. House committee reinvestigated the assassination in 1979 and said Marcello had motive, means, and opportunity, while also noting it could not establish direct evidence of his complicity. Whether you accept Shaw's conclusion or not, the hard fact is Kilgallen's promised bigger story never appeared, and her research never resurfaced. The result is a case built from what she published, what others remembered, and what went missing when the lights went out. Now it's time to hear from you. When you line up Kilgallen's Ruby interview, her insistence that key evidence never reached the public, and then the uncertain circumstances of her death, what detail feels most important to you and why? Let us know in the comments section.